Before we get started, I want to just go through some, I guess, announcements or reminders, a few new things. So this is the Moodle page that you see. This is a reminder that Quiz 2 is due on Sunday, this coming Sunday. Pick it up at the desk, take it somewhere here in the CST. Let's make it so I know that sometimes you folks use this space here for studying, and you also use it for taking the test. And that leads to issues, right? If people are talking about the material while other people are taking the test, that's an issue. So starting now, if other people are, if you know who's in the class, if other classmates are talking about anatomy in this space, you can take the quiz to, feel free to take the quiz to another space where other people are not talking about it. And if you're talking about the quiz and you see other students in this space, working on it, maybe, talk quietly or go some, just temporarily go somewhere else or figure it out. I mean, just figure it out so that people aren't talking about the material loudly while other people are trying to take the quiz. So the deadline is 11:30 because the desk closes and the envelope becomes locked away at midnight. So, but if you started at 11:30 and you're still working on it, what do? What you do is you write the time on your quiz and you slide it under my office door. And I'll get it the next morning like I would get the envelope. Okay? But the deadline, just to be clear, and I might charge you a few points for being late, because the deadline is to have it be in the envelope, and the envelope locks away at midnight. Okay? So you don't have to feel like you have to rush, but you should make the deadline, because if you don't, there could be a late penalty. All of the PowerPoints, including today's, are now up there, so you can use that for studying both the anatomy and the physiology. So PowerPoint, I'm scrolling backwards, PowerPoints, key concepts list, which is helpful for the quizzes and for the exam. The exam is a week from today. What we will do is, there's no lab that day. So there are 3 options for taking the exam that day. You can take the exam here at 8:30 in the morning in this space. You can take the exam at 1 o'clock in the afternoon in the lab. Many of you have conflicts. And you can take the exam at 7 o'clock p.m. in the lab, right? And so those are the 3 options. So that's the flexibility that I'm willing to offer for taking the exam. 3 times that day. The only additional flexibility that I would offer is if you have a disease, if you're sick, I'm willing to look at some other, time. But other than that, those 3 options are yours to choose. You don't have to tell me when. You just show up at one of those times. Lab worksheets are available. So, the lab worksheets and answers, lab worksheet and answers, lab worksheet for this coming week, for tonight and Tuesday, is now available. So those of you who are in the Tuesday lab and feel like, I'd like to see the material that was on the worksheet for this week, it's available to you. The answers are not yet available, but you can find the answers from the coloring book, Wikipedia, whatever. You can find the answers. You can borrow the CD-ROM of AMP Revealed from the desk and use any computer that has a CD-ROM drive. And finally, what I want to talk about is cheating on these quizzes. Question?
I was going to say, is that material going to be on this quiz?
Is what material? Is
From
the
today's lab?
Yeah. So today's class material, the coloring book material, and that's the core material for studying for the quiz. It turns out that tonight's lab does move into that material. So that's why I'm posting the worksheet now. I'm trying to not give the Thursday evening lab group too much of an advantage. They don't have much of an advantage. They have 1 hour of AMP reveal time that other people might not have. But you can compensate for that by using the coloring book, Wikipedia, or borrowing the AMP reveal CD from me or from the desk. If you want to borrow it over Saturday, talk to me. You know, I can let you have one of the lab copies over Saturday. Okay, I'm trying to make the playing field as level as I can. So I just want to point out that there's an anonymous forum up on Moodle addressing the question of cheating during these open, closed book, but honor system quizzes. And I know it's asking a lot. Earlham students pride themselves in their academic integrity, and I trust it. But it's not foolproof. It's not flawless. And so I'm interested in your opinions and your awarenesses about cheating during these quizzes. Because like I said, it's asking a lot. It's asking you to put the answers away and not look at them. That's asking a lot. It's asking a lot of you when you see someone doing something, like with a phone in their hand during a quiz, to either confronting that student or telling me, or both. That's asking a lot. It's asking a lot of you. I appreciate that. And when there's cheating, it erodes the trust. It erodes the trust that we have in each other, and it erodes the trust that I have in you, and it erodes the trust that I have in myself in setting up a system like this. So I just want to, my information is limited, and so I'm asking for you to give me information or opinions anonymously through the forum. This quiz 2 that's now available is the same deal. You pick it up at the desk, and you take it here, and then you turn it in. But I guess I'm not. I would like to keep that system going for the rest of the semester. Any questions about that? Because there are alternatives to these quizzes. I could take class time, I could take lab time, I could set up weekend time that has a TA available to monitor the situation. There's alternatives, and I'm curious about your opinions and your knowledge.
You mentioned earlier about if other people are studying and going somewhere else. Are we able to use the space on the second floor, that reading room area?
Yeah. You can even take it into one of the private rooms.
Okay.
Because how would I know? But again, I'm trusting you to leave your books somewhere else, because the temptation, books, electronics, phone, everything. Because the temptation is real. I know it's real. And I want you to avoid it. And
As I say, one thing I do is that I'll study out here, and then when it's time to take it, I'll leave my stuff here and then use one of the private rooms.
that's a good strategy. Other questions? So, like I said, I'm really interested in your opinions and your information about this on this anonymous forum. I won't know, and you can see, you can go to this forum and see what other students are posting, but it's completely anonymous. You don't know who's saying what, and I don't know who's saying what. Okay, let's get to it. So what we're going to do today is do a little bit of review of surface and midline sagittal neuroanatomy, some terms that I'm asking you to know. And then we're going to turn our attention to a different section, to coronal neuroanatomy. So this is slicing sagittally and midline, and we could move laterally, but we can also cut coronally and look at the brain in the other dimension. Those are the two slice dimensions that I am asking you to learn neuroanatomy from. We're not going to do horizontal sections. So let's play the game. I'm going to start in this corner. You willing to go first? The game is you point to something on the screen. Actually, help me by pointing over there where I can write on it, and give me a name. Anything that has a correct name is a correct answer. So point over here. I've got my colored markers. Anything. On the surface or in the midline sagittal section. Cerebellum. Okay.
Medulla.
Medulla. Medulla oblongata. Because we have some other medullas in our body. So this is the medulla. This is the cerebellum. Those are taken. Corpus callosum. Bundles of white matter myelinated axons connecting the two hemispheres. Very important.
Well, the history right
I'm sorry, this thing is making noise and it's hard for me to hear over
here.
here.
Hippocampus.
We cannot really see the hippocampus in any of these slides yet.
Okay, so occipital lobe right here.
Occipital lobe. Okay, good. Occipital lobe. Okay, sure. So part of the occipital lobe, or the functional area of one of the functions of the occipital lobe, is the visual area or visual cortex. Pons, good. Pons. Pons. Yes.
For the purposes of the quiz, would things like occipital lobe and visual cortex be different labels?
Yeah.
Is that like the thalamus?
Yeah, this is the thalamus.
Midbrain?
Midbrain. This one here?
Yeah.
This is, that's good, yes. This is the precentral gyrus. The lateral sulcus.
The parietal lobe?
Ah, okay, yes, the parietal lobe. So this area here, yeah, that's pretty good. Parietal lobe.
So temporal lobe? Right.
Temporal lobe. Okay.
The frontal lobe?
Frontal lobe. which is also here. Bob.
Hypothalamus?
Hypothalamus.
The post-central gyrus.
Good. Post-central gyrus. Yep.
Central sulcus.
Central sulcus.
Thank you.
Okay, the cerebral, the whole thing, cerebral cortex, I buy it. Pituitary gland. Okay, so I'm going to ask, so we're getting down, it's getting harder, I can tell. Let me see if I can ask you some questions. Okay, does anybody know the name of this gyrus? It's a gyrus we can see on the midline. It's right above the corpus callosum. That one's got a name, and it's called the cingulate gyrus. Does anyone know the name of this membrane? Right here, it's a very thin membrane that separates two chambers that are filled with cerebrospinal fluid called the lateral ventricles, which we can't see here because it's behind the membrane and it's buried deep here. What, does anyone know the name of this membrane that we see at the midline, separating the two lateral ventricles?
Is that the third ventricle?
No, the third ventricle is buried down in here somewhere. The name of the membrane is the, I can't see if I write on that camera. Okay, this has a name. It's called the septum, like the septum of your nose, of separator. Septum pellucidum. Septum pellucidum. Septum pellucidum are the two, is the membrane that separates the two lateral ventricles. Okay, good. I think we're, can I have the laser? Yeah, question.
Will the nerves be like this? Like, is that the olfactory nerve?
Right there is the olfactory nerve. Yeah, they will be.
Okay.
Yeah, we are going to get to the cranial nerves today, right now, soon. So we could play this game on something else. Looking for a button. It's over here. We could play this game with a cartoon, but why would we do that? We've just played the game. So, but you have this on your handout. You can get this full size from the PowerPoint on Moodle, and you can test yourself with a different image than the one that we just worked with. So this is a resource available to you, but we're not going to do that now because we've done it. But you know, and it's a little different. And it's a little idealized, right? So there's the pituitary, hypothalamus, thalamus, pons, midbrain, pons, medulla. You can see the idealization of the things that were on the actual photograph. Cerebellum, etc. Yeah.
Is the cingulate gyrus extend all the way around the corpus callosum?
Yeah, so at least in this cartoon, they're saying it does.
Okay.
So we have the anterior cingulate and the posterior cingulate and the superior cingulate. It was hard to see on the actual brain, but I guess on a cartoon you can say that it does. Okay, so that's a game you can play at home. Here is the answer key to the cartoon that the photograph that we were playing. Whole bunches of things that I don't want you to know, but here's the list of the things that you should be able to identify. So you should be able to identify the central sulcus, the pre- and post-central gyrus, longitudinal fissure, which we can't see here. So that's gonna be on a different, we can't see the longitudinal fissure because here it's invisible, it's behind it, and here we've cut through the longitudinal fissure, it's gone. So the longitudinal fissure can't be seen in this projection, but you're gonna see it in a minute. The lateral fissure, we had that one, lateral sulcus. Lobes, we did those. Cerebellum, midbrain, pons medulla, we did those. Thalamus, hypothalamus, we did those. Corpus callosum, so there's the cingulate, and we can't see the hippocampus yet, but we're going to. Okay, so here's a key of sort of a word list of things to learn the names of. And it's partial, but it's a start. So now we're going to switch to coronal sections. Slicing the brain coronally. And so now it gets tricky because you have to know where the slice is. Is the slice here? Or is the slice here? Or is the slice here as shown? Or is it back here? So I have to give you some information about where we are because it changes as you go from front to back. Here is a cartoon version of a coronal section through the thalamus. Basically, the thalamus becomes our reference point. But if I said, well, you'll see, we're going to do some sections anterior to the thalamus that are not going to have the thalamus in them. They're going to have other things here in this complicated middle part of the brain. So so here's a cartoon of things that we could label. When we see a coronal section, we see the gray and the white matter areas. And that's a label. You can, it's a cheap one, but it's right. So I'll give you credit for labeling gray matter and white matter. In a coronal section, I can't give you, well, there's only one place really that we see white matter for sure here, and that's the corpus callosum. Other than that, we don't see gray or white matter because of the way this is sliced. But here, we see gray and white matter. And another important point is that the gray matter has layers 1 through 6. And as you go through in more advanced neurobiology, the synapses at the different layers of the gray matter. So layer 1 is most superficial, layer 6 is most deep of the gray matter layer. Different layers have different cell bodies and different synapses. And we're not going to go through that too much, but I do want you to know that there are layers. Okay, so now we're going to play the game, and I'm going to see what you know. I haven't taught it yet, but let's try this. This is a coronal section anterior to the thalamus. The thalamus is not in this coronal section. But there are things you can label here. If you can think, who was next? You were next? Okay. So there are things that you can label based on what I told you from the sagittal section. And I want to see if you can figure it out. So let's play over here now. Markers. That is the lateral, these two butterfly-shaped things are the lateral ventricles. Filled with cerebrospinal fluid.
Is this the corpus callosum?
That is the corpus callosum. Good. So this this white matter bundle connecting the two hemispheres is the corpus callosum.
The cerebrum. The cerebrum.
Okay, cerebrum. That's the, now, so is that right or left? Is that the right or left hemisphere of the cerebrum?
Oh. Right.
Kind of, if we're looking at it from the front, so this is the right side and this is the left side. So this is the way to do this. Is we're always looking at it from the front unless I tell you otherwise. Okay, Joey? Okay, so this is the right cerebral hemisphere and this is the left cerebral hemisphere. And you could say the whole thing is the cerebrum. I'm okay with that.
Is that the thalamus?
No, because I told you just now that we are anterior to the thalamus. The thalamus is not in this image.
So then, is that the gray matter?
Okay, gray matter. Not the most sophisticated label, but it's a correct label.
Is that the third ventricle?
Show me, I need to see the red spot. Right here, actually, this is the third ventricle. Good.
Would this be the gyrus?
Say again?
Would this be a gyrus?
Okay, yeah, so each of these lumps is a gyrus. I don't know what the name of that one is, but I will accept that as a label. That's a gyrus. That is the temporal lobe. So right here, this is the temporal lobe.
Would this, would this be the lateral gyrus? Or the,
Lateral, it's the lateral something.
or sulcus?
Right.
Sulcus.
It's the lateral sulcus. So this is the lateral sulcus. Separating the left temporal lobe from the left frontal lobe. We'll circle back. Okay. Here, and we'll work our way back. Okay, let me give you some hints of things that you could label. Okay, white matter. That's pretty cheap, but that
There you
works.
go.
That's correct. White matter.
I was gonna say.
I will not accept layers, so if you point to this and say, okay, that's layer 6, I'm not gonna do that. That's off the table. Okay, do you have anything for me? Okay, so what is the name of the gyrus that is right above the corpus callosum? I just told you a few minutes ago. What's the name of that gyrus? The gyrus? So let me go back to, remember I told you that this gyrus above the corpus callosum, above, so lateral ventricle, corpus callosum, gyrus. It's a gyrus. It has a name, and I told you the name of it, and now we are looking at it looking at it in cross-section, what's the name of it? Cingulate gyrus. That is the cingulate gyrus. Okay, what else can we see? Okay, so now let me teach you a few. Anybody got some other ones that we can add here before I start adding some new information? What's that? You got one?
Longitudinal fissure.
Okay, good. Sure. This right here is the longitudinal fissure. Anybody else? Sophie?
Are the like gray circles, is that the midbrain? Or-
Nope, midbrain is, we're too far forward to see the midbrain.
Okay.
So let me tell you what these are. Joey thought that maybe this was the thalamus, but we're too far forward for the thalamus. This is where the thalamus is going to be when we move back. But we are anterior to the thalamus, and this is called the caudate, C-A-U-D-A-T-E, nucleus. Caudate nucleus, and it's going to be important in the motor system. The gray matter, not the white matter that's sort of slicing through it, is the caudate nucleus. And your landmark for the caudate is that it borders the lateral ventricle when we're anterior. Below the caudate, some more gray matter, and in this slice, it's called the putamen. And it is also part of the motor system. So here is the right caudate and the left caudate. The right putamen and the left putamen. I typically will not accept right and left as separate labels on this because it's so symmetrical. So don't label left and right, think you're getting two labels. And this white matter here has a name. So this is white matter, just general, generic white matter. But this white matter, separating the caudate from the putamen, has a name, and it's called the internal capsule. And again, it's part of the motor system. Okay, so now we have some coronal neuroanatomy. Let's move backwards. So we're moving back. So some of the names are the same. Right? I mean, temporal lobe, lateral fissure, longitudinal fissure, corpus callosum, lateral ventricles, septum pellucidum. You can see, so things are different, but we can, oh, what do you suppose this is? This gray matter next to the lateral ventricle. It's still the caudate. This is the putamen, so I should have told you, this is still anterior to the thalamus. We're still in front of the thalamus. So this is the caudate in this projection, in this coronal section. This is the putamen. And these two structures, here's the internal capsule, separating the caudate from the putamen. And these two structures have a name. And their name is globus pallidus. So if you see a coronal section with this sort of beautiful stripy structure, caudate, internal capsule, putamen, globus pallidus. Both of them, globus pallidus 1, globus pallidus 2. Together they are the globus pallidus. This is the third ventricle. point you over here, so this side. Okay, so temporal lobe, lateral sulcus, longitudinal sulcus, gray matter, white matter, corpus callosum, lateral ventricles, septum pellucidum between them, third ventricle, caudate, internal capsule, putamen, globus pallidus. It's challenging. I admit that this is challenging. Teach it for 10 years and it comes pretty natural, but I know that it's challenging. Question? Yes. Third ventricle is this long space here. Okay, so let's move a little further back. Now, oh, question.
Could you reiterate what you said about like the symmetry and how it will affect the answers on the quiz?
Right, so if you label this as the left temporal lobe, I will not accept this as the right temporal lobe as a correct answer. It's too cheap. If you label this as the left caudate, then this is already labeled.
Okay, so
Okay.
you'd be looking for like just say like caudate or temporal.
Yeah, so if you just say caudate, you get the full credit.
Okay.
If you're right, that is, if you're pointing to the right thing. Okay, so we're moving back. More posterior. Yes.
What's the white matter right under lateral ventricle?
Ah. This thing?
Up. And look
This
right
here.
this.
I don't actually know. So let's look it up. So you can see that you know when you go to medical school and you have to learn all of these things, it's harder. Number 7, page 13. That's called the body, that's the fornix. Okay, so we're gonna see, this is the fornix. So the corpus, so we're gonna see this in another section. I wasn't aware of it in this section, but that's called the fornix, F-O-R-N-I-X. And actually, there's another bit of white matter. These two pieces of white matter right here are the optic tracts. That's optic nerve, but now we call it optic tract because we're in the brain. Optic tract, fornix, corpus callosum. Okay, so now we are at the level of the thalamus. We have moved back, we see the thalamus. Somebody, well, sure, I'll just, thalamus. This faint area here, so now we're seeing midbrain. Midbrain and pons. And medulla is sort of pale, faded out here in this scan. So midbrain, pons, medulla are now seen because we have moved far enough back. Let me go to a sagittal section and try to catch you up as to where we are. So we sliced approximately here was the first coronal section, and then here was the second coronal section, and now we're here. So we're starting to see midbrain, pons, and medulla. Thalamus, midbrain, pons, medulla. Corpus callosum, fornix. What do you suppose this little bit of really folded material is right here? That's the cerebellum. little piece of the cerebellum caught in this section. If we go further back, lot of cerebellum. Cerebellum, white matter of the cerebellum, midbrain, pons, medulla, lateral ventricle, corpus callosum, singular gyrus. I'm just using the language again. This right here, this little blob right here has a name. It's called the pineal gland. Some of you may have heard of it because that's where melatonin is released, from the pineal gland. It's important for sleep. Pineal gland. So that's got a name. And these two things have a name called the superior colliculus. It's going to be part of the visual system again. Superior colliculus. Oh, and somebody was interested in a structure that was named, but I said you couldn't see it yet. Now you can see it. Temporal lobe, medial temporal lobe. Some of you might know an important structure that's in the medial temporal lobe. What's the name of that structure? Hippocampus. This and this are the hippocampi. Hippocampus in the medial temporal lobe. Questions about any of these sections? This is challenging. It's a lot of learning. Yes, Joey.
Will this be posted with like the answers for the numbers? Or?
What's posted is the PowerPoint. And so what you see is the section and the names of the things that I want you to be able to identify. So in the notes area are the names, but you then have to match. And so that's true for all of these things. So for example, here is, let me just enlarge the notes section. Oh, you can see everything. So here are the structures that you can see on this slide. Here are the new structures that you can see on this slide that you couldn't, these are the ones you could see before. It's just, these are the ones you could see before, and here are the new ones. These are the ones you could see before, and here are the new ones. These are the new ones. I got tired of typing the names of the ones you could see before. Yes?
Can you see the amygdala on this one?
See the what?
Amygdala.
Amygdala. Yes, let's see. Can we see the amygdala? The amygdala is anterior to the hippocampus. So I'm now moving forward. I might have chosen sections that were I may have missed the amygdala by going from one section to the next section. The amygdala might have been missed, but it would be somewhere around here in the temporal lobe, near the, so medial temporal lobe, near the parietal lobe, that junction, that's got a name, I'm blanking on it, incus, near the incus. But the fact that the book doesn't label this as amygdala means I think I missed it. This is where the amygdala would be. But you can identify the hippocampus by this interesting, well, it's got a C within a C structure in many sections. So I must admit that the C structure here tells me it's hippocampus. Yeah.
There was one label on the notes that I didn't recognize. It was like choroid?
Oh, choroid plexus, thank you. So here, let's go to this one. This fuzzy dark material, lining the lateral ventricle is the choroid plexus. And it's what makes cerebrospinal fluid. That's its function, that's why it gets a name. Choroid plexus, let me spell that out for you. Choroid plexus. It's not neuronal, it's vascular, it makes cerebrospinal fluid.
Can you say what number is it?
What?
What the number?
All the numbers are the things that the book labels. I'm not asking you to know all of them.
Like for the choroid plexus, which one?
Oh, which number? 30. No, I'm sorry, I'm in the wrong place. 32. 32 would be labeling the choroid plexus. So you can see that when we get to medical school, when you get to medical school or PT or neuroimaging graduate program, there's more to this. Okay, so now I'm going to transition away from anatomy a little bit. I just want to point out that the white matter, let's go back to this white matter, then the internal capsule and goes into the spinal cord, is what is all the connections. And there's interesting technology that turns the white matter into specific fibers. And we're not going to talk about that technology, but you can see when you use that technology, you can see fibers forming in the white matter. So this here is actually the motor pathway. The blue is the motor pathway. And this red here is the corpus callosum. And this red here is the fornix. Question?
I was wondering, is gray matter like synonymous with cortex, or not necessarily?
No, gray and white matter is cerebral cortex or cerebrum. Cortical gray matter would be gray matter. The language gets a little fuzzy there. Okay, and so I'm not going to go through these because these are games you play at home, right? Here is a superficial view. You can label it, and you can label lots of things. Here is a superior view that I downloaded from the internet, and the internet blanked out some of the labels, so you can use this to test your knowledge. Self-testing is an important way to get this stuff into your brain, and I'm happy. The answers are not posted, but I'm happy to provide answers if you ask. But you know, if this is a superior view, that's the longitudinal fissure. This here is pointing to these two cerebral hemispheres, right? So you can play this game. Here's another one, a midline sagittal section. I gave you another one. This is now, what, the third of the day. Now we're going to turn to the cranial nerves. I think it was Charlie or somebody over here asked, do we need to know the cranial nerves? So these are some of the nerves that connect important parts of the brain to important parts of the body. And the answer to my question is you need to know their names and you need to know their functions, but you don't need to know, I will not ask you to label a cartoon like this, okay? So here is the way they are. We've seen the olfactory nerve, that was the one that we saw in that section, and we can actually see it on the brain in the lab. The optic nerve. There's the crossing, we'll talk about that in the visual system, called the optic chiasm. Oculomotor. Trigeminal. So the names are all here. But let's not focus on, so they're here and they have anatomy, but I'm not asking you to map the names onto the anatomy. What I am asking you, and there's a Quizlet you can play, what I am asking you to do is know the names of the 12 cranial nerves and know their function. And there are mnemonic devices, so let's stop here because this is stuff that I want you to be fresh. So let's take a 3-minute break and we'll come back and we'll talk about the cranial nerves. This is more neuroanatomy, and this is a rite of passage, right? Learning the cranial nerves, so you're in it. 12 cranial nerves, each with names and each with functions. Mnemonic devices have evolved over the years. The one I like best is this one. Old Oprah's occupation, tropical trips aboard famous vessels, glamorous vacations, accumulating height. Sorry to Oprah. It works. So you can just memorize the mnemonic. Old Oprah's occupation, tropical trips aboard famous vessels, glamorous vacations, accumulating height. And the reason I like it is because the first 3 letters of the word, not just the first letter, the first 3 letters of the word align with the first 3 letters, oh, well, no, in some cases it's 3, in some cases it's only 2, but it's more than 1. It aligns with the name of the cranial nerve. Okay? I'm not going to go, okay? Olfactory, old. Optic, no, this will be 2. So the names are, I'm just going to read them out. Olfactory, and this is going more or less from anterior to posterior. Olfactory, optic, oculomotor, trochlear, trigeminal, abducens, facial vestibulocochlear, glossopharyngeal, vagus, accessory, hypoglossal. Old Oprah's occupation, tropical trips aboard famous vessels, glamorous vacations, accumulating height. So if you learn the mnemonic, you can get very close to knowing the name of the nerve. Well, at least the first 2 letters. It's not the glamorous nerve, it's the glossopharyngeal nerve. And I won't accept glamorous for glossopharyngeal, but it'll help you remember glossopharyngeal. There is a mnemonic for function as well. Some say money matters, but my brother says big brains matter more. It's actually a good mnemonic. So now it's just the first letter. Some say money matters, but my brother says big brains matter more. Some means it's a sensory nerve. So now you can put together the olfactory nerve is a sensory nerve that serves the sense of smell. Olfaction. Sensory information from the nose to the brain, serving the sense of smell. Sensory in the smell modality. Optic is a sensory nerve, and you know what it's for. It's for vision. Oculomotor. Money. Motor. Oculomotor. Movement of the eyes. Trochlear. Motor. Movement of the eyes. Trigeminal. Both motor and sensory. The trigeminal nerve carries sensory information from the jaw to the brain and it controls muscles of chewing and speaking.
So that's motor, right?
So the sensory is sensation of the face, and the motor is movement of the face, some of the movement of the face.
So both.
So both. That's what both means, yeah, both sensory and motor. Abducens is a motor nerve that also serves movement of the eyes. We're good at moving our eyes around. I'm good at this. The facial nerve is, again, both. Sensory nerves of the face and motor nerves of sort of facial expression. When I frown, when I smile, when I look sad. That's the facial nerve working with me. So that's both. And so this is both sensory and motor control of the face. Vestibulocochlear is sensory. Auditory, hearing. Vestibulocochlear, auditory and vestibular, which is our vestibular system is really a sense of balance. Our ability to stand upright on two legs. Both sensory, auditory sense and balance sense are carried from the ear, from the inner ear, to the brain by the vestibulocochlear nerve. Now it gets a little bit fuzzy down here. Glossopharyngeal, glossopharyngeal, in the throat. Control of sensation in the throat and motor control in the throat. Important for swallowing. Vagus, the vagus nerve. The word vagus comes from the same root as vagabond, traveler. It's a nerve that goes all over the body, and it carries both sensory information from the body to the brain and motor information from the brain to the body. Not muscle body, but like movement of, it can control the heart rate, and that would be considered a motor function because it's changing a muscle. It can also control movement of the digestive tract. What's interesting is people think that there's a new function for the vagus that's coming out recently with the elucidation of the microbiome. So the microbiome, which changes your gut, changes your behavior. And some of that is carried to the brain by the vagus nerve. Yes?
So what was the sensory function of the vagus?
The sensory function for the vagus is sensing our internal organs. So this one's complicated because it just does so much. It goes everywhere. The accessory is a motor, controls our shoulders and neck. The muscles of our shoulder and neck, the trapezius is innervated by the accessory nerve. And hypoglossal is our muscle controls our tongue. Accessory is shoulder, muscle, and hypoglossal tongue control. Again, for speaking, swallowing, chewing. Sophia.
In the coloring book, it said that number 11 is like a spinal nerve.
Yeah, spinal accessory nerve is what they sometimes call it.
So, like, could you explain why?
Because it's purely motor and unlike all the other, well, it's a motor of part of our body. I'm not sure why they would call it spinal accessory. I just call it the accessory nerve.
But it's still considered a cranial?
It is considered a cranial. Okay, so information, more information to pack into your brains for the quiz. I think I'm done with quiz material. So I'm going to move on. Yeah, I'm going to use this next 15 minutes. Oh no, there's one more thing. So, sorry. So now we're going to start to talk about nervous systems, using other language to talk about the nervous. So we think about the nervous system, but we break it down into compartments. So for example, the nervous system is broken down into the central and the peripheral. Central and non-central, peripheral. The central nervous system is broken down into the brain and the spinal cord. The spinal cord, even though it's out here in our body, is part of the central nervous system. The peripheral nervous system is broken down into a somatic nervous system and an autonomic nervous system. The somatic is sensation from the body and control, motor control of the body. The autonomic nervous system is broken down into the sympathetic and parasympathetic. Those of you who have taken AMP 2 have already heard a lot of this. The sympathetic nervous system is the fight, flight, arousal, active nervous system. And the parasympathetic nervous system is just as important for resting and digesting. So sympathetic is fight and flight, parasympathetic is rest and digest. Branches of the autonomic division. We're going to start to talk about a lot of this physiology. So now I want to introduce the autonomic nervous systems. Here's the sympathetic nervous system, and here's the parasympathetic nervous system over here. So this cartoon is way too complicated to get much information from. The main point is both of these nervous systems control parts of our body that we are not, that's not under our conscious control, but our brain and our spinal cord still controls them. So for example, the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system control cry. Actors, I suppose, can turn on the tears at will, but most of us can't. Let's take another example. The sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system control the heart rate and the strength of contraction. You can't change your heart rate just by thinking about it. Well, I could probably change your heart rate. I could say, okay, we're going to do a quiz right now. We're going to do a quiz right now. That's going to get your heart rate. That's the fight and flight response, and that would get your heart rate going, right? Probably not because you didn't believe me, but if I was convincing, I would get your heart rate up. Yes, Robin.
What do the dashed lines mean in this diagram?
The dashed lines, okay, so we're going to talk about preganglionic and postganglionic. Hold that thought. Dashed lines are postganglionic. The sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system control the diameter of our airway. So when you're under stress, like exercising, your airway dilates. And then, if you don't need it, your parasympathetic nervous system brings it back to normal. Movement of the gut during digestion. is controlled by the parasympathetic nervous system and partially controlled by the sympathetic nervous system. Okay? So all of this stuff that you don't really have control over, but it's very important. Controlling your heart rate, controlling the ability for air to move into your lungs, controlling the flow of digestive food through your digestive tract, controlling salivation. You can't just, well, you have a little bit of control over salivation. I have a little bit of control over your salivation. If I start convincing you that it's lunchtime and just imagine the smell of lasagna, that's just the thought of food is actually activating your parasympathetic nervous system and getting you to salivate just a little bit more than you were before. You may not be aware of it, but I am. So, so let's break this down just a little bit more. This cartoon is important information to know, but not for the quiz. Let me just be clear, not for the quiz. The somatic nervous system, and really you should annotate your slide here, this is somatic motor. This is not somatic sensory. This is somatic motor. This is our ability to move our body. The cell bodies are in the spinal cord. The axons go all the way to the muscles. The neurotransmitter is acetylcholine. And the receptors on the muscles is the nicotinic receptor. You know this already from cell phys. Okay, so that was a review of cell phys. Let's go to the sympathetic nervous system, the fight and flight response. There are nerves in your spinal cord that control sympathetic ganglia. A ganglion is a clump of nerve cells. So this nerve is preganglionic, and this nerve is postganglionic. Going back to the previous slide, these are the central nervous system preganglionic nerves that make a synapse in ganglia, and then those postganglionic neurons project to their targets. So we have sympathetic ganglia that are near the spinal cord, and we have sympathetic ganglia that are closer to their targets. But that's a detail I don't care that you memorize. Preganglionic neurons, ganglia near the spinal cord, clumps of neurons that make synapse. Synapse is here, and then postganglionic neurons to their target. Preganglionic, postganglionic. This cartoon is cartooning a situation where the preganglionic neuron is short and the postganglionic neuron is long. It's really illustrating something like this. Right? Here's a preganglionic neuron that makes a synapse. This distance is very short because this is right outside the spinal cord, and this distance is long. It's from the spinal cord to the heart. That's what this is cartooning. The neurotransmitter released by the preganglionic neuron is acetylcholine. So this is cholinergic. The postganglionic neuron has receptors that are nicotinic acetylcholine receptors that are very similar to, but not identical to, the nicotinic receptors in the skeletal muscle. These are slightly different. They have different pharmacology, really. But they are nicotinic. They're ion channels. This is an excitatory synapse. So then action potentials propagate. The neurotransmitter released by the postganglionic neuron is norepinephrine. So what kind of neuron is this? Adrenergic or noradrenergic neuron, because it releases norepinephrine. And the types of receptors on the target are adrenergic receptors. And they can either be excitatory or inhibitory because it depends on whether they're GS or GI. Couple. This is really part of the endocrine system because we were talking about receptors, neurotransmitter, hormone in this case, going through the blood. So let's put this one aside. This is the sympathetic bit of the endocrine system. So let's focus on the nervous system. Preganglionic, acetylcholine, nicotinic, neurotransmitter released here, norepinephrine, and noradrenergic receptors. This is always excitatory. This is excitatory or inhibitory depending on the receptor. Now let's go to the parasympathetic nervous system. Preganglionic, because in the parasympathetic nervous system, the cell bodies are in the midbrain, well, the brainstem, and their preganglionic neurons are long. And then there are parasympathetic ganglia at the target. They're tiny little buggers. Let me see. The point is that the preganglionic neuron cell body is in the central nervous system. It's actually in the brainstem. Long neuron to the target ganglia, where acetylcholine is the neurotransmitter and nicotinic receptors are the receptors. Excitation, a short neuron, because we're already at the target, from the target ganglion to the target organ. The neurotransmitter is acetylcholine again, but the target receptors are muscarinic now. So now it can be excitatory or inhibitory depending on the receptor. GQ versus GI.
Are the receptors on the sympathetic nervous system also muscarinic, or are they?
This here?
No, the ones in the.
Nope, they're not muscarinic. They're metabotropic, but they're
Oh, right.
they can't be muscarinic because they're not receiving acetylcholine.
Right, yeah.
These are metabotropic adrenergic receptors. Let's hold off on this, except for, this was a coloring book assignment, so I just want to emphasize that the spinal cord is sections, and there is the cervical in the neck, thoracic in the chest, lumbar, sacral, and coccygeal in the lower back and butt. Those words were part of a coloring book assignment. I'm just mentioning them here. We'll talk about all of this later. I just want you to know the divisions from superior to posterior, from superior to inferior of the spinal cord. Cervical, thoracic, lumbar, sacral, coccygeal. There's probably a mnemonic for that, but I don't know what it is. What we're not going to get to today is the hippocampus. It's not on the quiz. I've got another class on Tuesday. On the schedule it says catch up and review. Well, I'm going to catch up by doing the hippocampus on Tuesday. Okay, so I'm happy to answer. I'm pretty free all day today. My computer is going to IT to get migrated from Windows 7 to Windows 10. I'm terrified, and so that my computer will never come back to me, which is be horrible. And so I'm just going to be sitting in my office, looking at books and phone and talking to some people. So if you have questions, today is a good day.